At a family gathering to transfer the inheritance, my parents stunned me by handing the entire $5 million to their favorite daughter and told me, point blank, to work harder. I was still trying to process the betrayal when my grandpa stood up, walked to the front of the room, and handed me a check for $55 million. My mom screamed, "You can't do this to me." But what Grandpa did next left her completely speechless. My name is Becky Lynch. I'm 28 years old, and in the eyes of my family, especially my mother, I've always been the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up, the black sheep, the what not to do example they probably used behind closed doors. My older sister, Melissa, was the golden girl from the moment she took her first breath, polished, pristine, and practically perfect in every way. A straight-A student who breezed through high school with honors, graduated from an Ivy League university, and married a neurosurgeon before the age of 30. Oh, and she's now the doting mother of 2 painfully photogenic kids. If you ever needed the definition of parental pride, you just have to look at the way my mom beamed every time Melissa walked into a room. And then there was me, the college dropout with paint under her fingernails, scraping by with a small art business, and living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls. I didn't wear designer clothes or post Christmas card-worthy photos online. I wore thrifted jackets, spent my weekends elbow-deep in oils and acrylics, and called my tiny rented studio home. But no matter how hard I worked to carve out a space for myself in this world, I was never enough in their eyes. My mother would barely acknowledge me unless she had a criticism to share about my clothes, my choices, my career, or even just the way I walked into a room. Success, she always said, was measured in bank balances and titles. Paintings were just a hobby. My dad, well, he never argued. He just sat quietly next to her, nodding when appropriate, his silence a kind of agreement I could never challenge. Despite the years of cold shoulders and backhanded compliments, I kept showing up. I still went to every birthday party, every holiday dinner, every family gathering, like a loyal dog waiting for scraps of affection. A smile, a kind word, a sliver of recognition that maybe, just maybe, I had value too. But whatever illusion I held on to shattered completely last Sunday. We were gathered at my parents' sprawling estate, the house on the hill that Melissa grew up in, where I was never once invited to live, even when I was at my lowest. It was supposed to be a simple brunch. That's what the invitation said. Just brunch. But something about the air that day felt different. Charged. My mother's eyes sparkled with something just a bit too smug. Melissa had this satisfied little smirk that didn't leave her face, even when she was chewing. And though everyone else chatted away, sipping wine and nibbling at pastries, I felt the walls around me closing in with a tension no one else seemed to notice. It happened halfway, through dessert. My dad stood up, tapped his wine glass with a fork, and cleared his throat like he was about to give a wedding toast. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today isn't just about brunch. It's also the day we finalize our inheritance plans. Your mother and I have decided to transfer our estate and financial assets now, rather than wait. We want to watch our legacy take shape while we're still alive to see it." My heart stopped. No one had told me this was happening. No discussion. No heads up. I froze in place, suddenly very aware of every fork clink, every pair of eyes around the table. My dad continued, his voice calm but final. "We've decided to grant the full $5 million in our family trust to Melissa." Melissa beamed, all white teeth and smug satisfaction. My jaw went slack. "She's earned it," Dad went on. "Through her accomplishments, her discipline, and her dedication. Everything we hoped for in a daughter." Then he turned to me. "Becky," he said, and for a moment there was something in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or hesitation, but it vanished just as quickly as it appeared. "You've chosen a different path, and we respect that. But life doesn't reward daydreamers. This inheritance is an investment, and Melissa is the better investment." There it was. The confirmation. I wasn't a daughter. I was a mistake. My throat burned with the urge to scream, but no sound came out. Around me, chairs creaked as people shifted awkwardly. Some avoided my gaze. Melissa looked at me with this apologetic, almost condescending smile, the kind that says, "You always knew this was mine." I stood up, more from instinct than intention. I didn't even know what I was going to say. But before I could find the words, the scrape of a chair pulled everyone's attention to the far end of the room. Grandpa Henry had risen slowly from his seat. At 84, he moved with the deliberate caution of someone who'd earned his aches. His cane tapped the wooden floor as he stood tall, eyes locked on my mother. Then, slowly, he turned to me. "Becky," he said, his voice strong despite the years. "Come here." I moved like I was sleepwalking, unsure what was happening. He reached into his blazer, pulled out a white envelope, and handed it to me with both hands. His grip trembled slightly, but his gaze never wavered. "This is for you," he said. "I sold a few properties I held in Ireland. $55 million. It's yours. All of it." Silence fell like a stone. My mother gasped so loudly you'd think someone had slapped her. Melissa's face drained of color. My father blinked like he was malfunctioning. "You can't do this to me," Mom shrieked. "That money belongs in the family. Becky can't handle that kind of responsibility. She barely knows how to manage a checking account." But Grandpa wasn't having it. He turned to her, his cane shaking now. "That fortune is mine. I built it from nothing. And I'll be damned if I let it die in the hands of people who think legacy means entitlement." He looked at me again, softer this time. "Becky showed up, even when you made it impossible. She's got heart. And I trust her to do something good with this." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it weighed more than just money. I hadn't even opened it. I didn't need to. That gesture alone broke something inside me, something that had been waiting to be acknowledged for decades. My mother's face was crimson with fury, and she whirled to my father. "Say something," she demanded. But Dad just rubbed his temple and looked away. For once, his silence didn't feel like indifference. It felt like defeat. Grandpa sat back down, breathing hard, and sipped his tea like he'd just dropped a casual truth bomb. My hands were still shaking, but not from the money. From the validation. The quiet, undeniable recognition that someone finally saw me, not as a disappointment, not as a cautionary tale, but as a person worthy of belief. The rest of the brunch blurred into background noise. Melissa avoided me entirely. My mother wouldn't even glance in my direction. Dad made a vague excuse about needing to take a call and disappeared. Only Grandpa stayed calm, sipping his tea like it was any other Sunday. But deep down, I knew the storm was just beginning. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced around my apartment, the same small space I'd lived in for years, now feeling completely foreign. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter, untouched, yet radiating an almost supernatural presence. I walked past it again and again, staring at it as if it might vanish. My mind played scenes from the brunch over and over. The way Melissa's smile had faded, the raw disbelief on my mother's face, the trembling of Grandpa's hands as he passed me that envelope like it was a torch. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something enormous and unknown, suspended between the version of myself my family had always seen and the version my grandfather had finally, unequivocally believed in. That envelope didn't just contain a check. It held proof that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't worthless, that someone who mattered saw me for more than my mistakes, my choices, my art. Someone believed I was worth investing in, not for what I'd done, but for who I was. By morning, my phone had turned into a war zone. Dozens of missed calls, most from my sister and my dad, a few from cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready. Then came the text that made my blood run cold. It was from Melissa. "Mom is spiraling. She says you manipulated Grandpa. Just a heads up." My fingers clenched around the phone. Manipulated? As if I had plotted this? As if I'd known Grandpa had hidden millions stashed away in overseas properties? The accusation wasn't just cruel, it was ridiculous. But I knew my mother. I knew her sense of pride, of entitlement. To her, the idea that someone like me, her failed artist daughter, her family embarrassment, could receive more than her perfect Melissa was not just offensive. It was unforgivable. She would never accept that someone she deemed unworthy could be chosen over the daughter she had spent her life grooming. Later that afternoon, I decided to clear my head and take a walk. I grabbed a coffee from the corner shop and tried to ground myself in the mundane. I thought about calling Grandpa just to thank him again, but part of me worried he might be getting pulled into the drama too. When I returned home, something immediately felt wrong. The hallway to my apartment was too quiet. My front door was slightly ajar. My heart sank. I pushed it open slowly, and what I saw inside sent a chill through my entire body. My home had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out and dumped. Couch cushions torn apart. My canvases, my heart, my art, had been slashed with something sharp, their colorful insides spilling out like wounds. My sketchbooks were missing. My laptop too. But worst of all, the envelope was gone. The check. The symbol of my worth. The proof of my grandfather's belief in me had been stolen. My legs threatened to give out beneath me. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat, and forced myself to call the police. The officers were sympathetic but practical. They dusted for fingerprints, took photos, asked for a list of missing items. I gave them everything I could remember, but my mind was already racing ahead. This wasn't a random break-in. Nothing else had been taken. Not the small stack of cash I kept hidden in a kitchen drawer, not the vintage camera my ex had given me, not even the jewelry box sitting in plain sight. No, they had come for one thing, the envelope. And I knew exactly who it was. The next morning, my suspicions were confirmed in the worst way. My grandfather's lawyer called. Someone had tried to deposit the check from his private estate into a joint account held by none other than my mother and father. My entire body went cold. They hadn't just ransacked my home. They had stolen from me. My own parents. The same people who looked me in the eyes the day before and told me to work harder. My fingers trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, rage and betrayal tightening in my chest like a vice. I drove straight to Grandpa's estate, barely remembering the turns. He opened the door, saw my face, and didn't ask a single question before ushering me inside. "Sit down," he said quietly. I collapsed onto the worn leather sofa in his study. He poured me tea, honey and lemon just how I liked it since I was a little girl, and listened as I recounted everything. The ransacked apartment, the missing envelope, the attempted bank deposit. His face remained eerily calm as he dialed his lawyer from his landline, his voice steel when he said, "This changes everything. If they're willing to break into her home, to steal from their own daughter, they no longer deserve the benefit of the doubt." By the next morning, it was handled. The original check had been voided and rendered useless. In its place, a legal trust had been created in my name, with the $55 million already transferred into a private, secure account that no one could touch but me. Grandpa didn't stop there. He had his lawyer draft a formal letter, one that was sent directly to my parents and Melissa. In it, he laid out everything. The betrayal, the break-in, the decades of favoritism. He didn't mince words. "You raised one daughter to believe she could do no wrong and another to believe she was worth nothing," he wrote. "And you wonder why I chose Becky. She never stopped showing up, even when you gave her every reason not to." The family group chat exploded. My mom was first, accusing me of poisoning Grandpa's mind, of lying to the police, of tearing the family apart. Melissa chimed in next, trying to play peacekeeper with messages that reeked of self-interest. "Let's just move past this," she wrote, as if decades of pain could be swept under a rug. Then came my father's message, a single sentence that sent a chill down my spine. "You'll regret this, Becky." It was cold, ominous, a threat, veiled in fatherly disappointment. But I didn't reply. I was done trying to explain myself to people who never cared to understand me in the first place. Then something happened that shook the remaining threads of our family beyond repair. Grandpa invited me to move in with him. "The estate's too big for me," he said. "It needs someone who actually cares about it. Help me manage it. Stay as long as you like." I accepted. Not because I wanted a mansion or a change in lifestyle, but because, for the first time in my life, it felt like home. A place where I didn't have to shrink myself to be tolerated. Where I could breathe. A week later, Melissa showed up at the gates. I saw her from the second-story window of the guest suite Grandpa had insisted I take. She buzzed the intercom 3 times. Grandpa finally answered, his voice calm but firm. "You're not welcome here anymore," he said. She shouted something about loyalty, about betrayal, about family. But he didn't respond. He didn't open the gates. She stood there for several minutes, defeated, and finally walked away. But my mother wasn't finished. In a last, desperate act, she took to Facebook. She posted a long, sob-laced diatribe accusing me of manipulating my elderly grandfather, of isolating him from the family, of committing elder abuse. She tagged dozens of people, extended relatives, old church friends, distant acquaintances, casting herself as the victim of a cruel scheme. I panicked. For a moment, I feared that people might believe her. But then something unexpected happened. Comments began to pour in. From people who knew our family, who had witnessed the subtle cruelties, the favoritism, the way my mother always belittled me in public, laughed at my art, dismissed me like I was some failed experiment. One cousin wrote, "I remember being at family dinners and watching Becky get talked over and ignored while Melissa got praised for breathing." Another added, "This doesn't surprise me at all. Becky always had to work 10 times harder just to be seen." An old high school friend messaged me privately saying, "I used to come to your house and feel so bad for you. Your mom never looked at you the way she looked at Melissa. I'm glad someone finally did." The tide turned. People saw the truth. 2 days later, my mother deleted the post. But the damage was done to her, not to me. In the weeks that followed, the air around me began to shift in subtle, almost surreal ways. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waking up dreading the day ahead. The constant weight of needing to prove myself, to earn my family's bare minimum approval, had lifted. I no longer had to brace myself for the judgment in my mother's stare or the cutting indifference of my father's silence. Living at Grandpa's estate was like stepping into a reality I didn't know I was allowed to have. The house itself, this elegant, ivy-covered relic nestled just outside the city, felt less like a mansion and more like a museum of memories, many of which I was only now being invited to share in. Grandpa would sit with me over tea and tell stories about his youth, about how he started with nothing and built everything with grit, determination, and an unshakable belief in fairness. And then, with the same calm tone, he'd tell me how he had watched quietly for years as my mother raised 2 daughters in 2 very different worlds, one of abundance and praise, and the other of shadow and silence. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. He didn't try to justify why he hadn't intervened sooner. But he said something I will never forget. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is standing up to your own child. But it's even harder watching that child destroy someone else because you didn't. That sentence hit me like a freight train. It was the closest thing to an apology I ever needed. It wasn't perfection I wanted for my family, it was acknowledgement. And finally, I had it. With the trust securely in place and Grandpa's unwavering support beside me, I began to dream again. Really dream. I used a small portion of the inheritance to purchase a building downtown, a beautiful old structure with brick walls and wide open space flooded with natural light. I turned it into a proper art studio, one with room to teach, to create, to breathe. But it wasn't just for me. I founded a non-profit art program, something I'd dreamed about for years, but never had the means to start. I called it the Becky Project, a name that once would have made me cringe, but now filled me with quiet pride. We offered free workshops, supplies, and mentorship for underprivileged kids, many of whom reminded me of younger versions of myself, overflowing with creativity and heart, yet surrounded by people who never took them seriously. The day we opened our doors, Grandpa was there. He stood at the front of the crowd, holding a giant pair of scissors for the ribbon cutting, and beamed as if I had just won an Olympic gold medal. He was the first donor, of course, but more than that, he was my foundation. The one person who gave me the space to finally become who I always was, just waiting to be seen. But not everyone was thrilled with my success. Melissa's messages came less frequently, but carried a sharper edge. They were rarely more than one line. Unfair. This should have been mine. He's old, Becky. You took advantage. I didn't respond to any of them. What could I say? The truth was, Melissa had spent her whole life with the deck stacked in her favor. She was used to winning without trying, to being handed gold while the rest of us fought for scraps. What bothered her wasn't that I had received the inheritance. It was that I had received anything at all. She couldn't comprehend a world where I was finally seen as her equal, let alone her better in any way. But the most chilling moment came months later, at a distant cousin's wedding. I wasn't planning to attend at first, but Grandpa insisted. "You've hidden long enough," he said. "Let them see who you are now." So, I went. I wore a long emerald green dress and my hair in soft waves, and I walked into that ballroom with my head held high. Grandpa held my arm, proud and strong beside me, as if daring anyone to say something sideways. My mother was there too, of course. She looked stunning, as always, dressed to perfection and surrounded by distant relatives who still clung to her curated image of elegance and poise. But the second her eyes met mine, her smile faltered. Just for a moment. She didn't speak to me. She didn't have to. The tightness in her jaw, the coldness in her glance, it said everything. But others noticed. A few cousins came over, complimenting the new studio, asking about the nonprofit. One even said, "I never realized how much you had going for you, Becky. I think I was just too busy looking at Melissa." I smiled, nodded, and thanked them, but inside, I was glowing. Not from vanity, from finally feeling like I mattered. Later that night, as the music played and the dance floor filled, Grandpa leaned over and whispered in my ear, "You've always been the strong one, Becky. They just didn't see it, but I did." And that was enough. That was everything. Thanks for watching till the end. If you felt this story deep in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and hit that subscribe button. More real stories are coming, ones that prove the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths.